Breaking news coming out of Seattle at this hour, a stabbing spree. At least 5 stabbed in Seattle late today. 10 people stabbed in the same area over the last day and a half. Authorities want to know if this is all related. They believe most of these attacks are. Authorities say those 5 people stabbed late this afternoon in the Chinatown area of Seattle. Again, at this point, they believe a total of 10 people stabbed in multiple locations in the same neighborhood over the last 2 days. Tonight, we have just learned a suspect is in custody. Here's our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, with us live tonight. Pierre, what have you learned?
Well, David, it was a nightmare scenario playing out over a series of hours with an assailant attacking unsuspecting victims, sending some to the emergency room. Tonight, scenes of chaos on the streets of Seattle. Officers racing to treat victims of a stabbing spree.
This is a horrific tragedy, a mass casualty event.
At least 10 people attacked in the Chinatown neighborhood over 38 hours. 5 people stabbed just today. Police are investigating if one of the stabbings involving a robbery is also related.
The injuries to those victims range from a minor cut to severe stab wounds.
Witnesses identifying a suspect in a series of what appear to be random attacks. That person now in custody. 4 of the stabbing victims today were hospitalized, and tonight the investigation is just getting started. David?
Pierre Thomas with the breaking news, the stabbing spree in Seattle tonight. Pierre, thank you.
A heat wave warning is in place for almost half the country today, with much of Queensland and the Northern Territory expecting to soar over 40 degrees. For more, let's bring in senior meteorologist Miriam Bradbury from the Bureau of Meteorology. Miriam, which parts of Australia will be feeling the heat today?
Well, over the last few days, we have actually seen those heatwave conditions contracting away from southern parts of Queensland, so a little bit less extensive than we saw over the weekend. That said, we are still seeing parts of northwest and central Queensland being impacted by those low to severe intensity heat waves, as well as the top end of the Northern Territory and parts of the Kimberley in Western Australia. And even where we don't have those heatwave warnings, we're continuing to see very hot weather across the northern parts of Australia. Temperatures 2 to 5 degrees above average, which for many areas, particularly inland, equates to temperatures in the high 30s at least, if not the low to mid 40s.
Plenty of rain around elsewhere though. Which states will be impacted by the wet weather?
Today, we're going to see the concentration of showers and thunderstorms through central parts of the country, largely impacting South Australia and southern parts of the Northern Territory, as well as southeast Queensland and northeast New South Wales, which are seeing an almost daily thunderstorm risk at the moment. Now, in those two areas, South Australia and southeast Queensland, northeast New South Wales, we could once again see severe thunderstorms today, which could bring the heavy rainfall that could lead to flash flooding, large hail or damaging winds. So the best way to stay on top of that is to just check the Bureau's website regularly through the course of this afternoon and evening in case we do need to issue any warnings for those storms.
Okay, Miriam Bradbury.
Canada is bracing for a potential rise in border crossings as the re-election of former President Donald Trump threatens to fuel a surge in asylum seekers. This comes as Trump reiterates his plan to deport millions of undocumented immigrants upon taking office in January. But what impact will this have on Canada's borders? Roxham Road near Hemingford, Quebec, became a popular route for asylum seekers in 2017 as thousands crossed into Canada seeking refuge. But in 2023, that changed, with the expansion of the Safe Third Country Agreement closing this route for good. The change forced many asylum seekers to use official entry points such as airports and land borders. But with Trump now promising mass deportations in the U.S., many fear Canada may soon see another increase in arrivals, this time in more remote and dangerous areas. And some warn that this could lead to a rise in human trafficking. Royal Canadian Mounted Police are on high alert as authorities monitor the situation. They're preparing for any scenario, whether it's a trickle of people or a massive influx. Canada's immigration system is already under strain, with delays in processing work permits and asylum claims. Immigration policy experts believe that whether or not Trump follows through on his deportation plans, Canada will need to have a broader discussion about how to manage these challenges in the coming years. Some expect to see the number of undocumented people rise by hundreds of thousands. Canadian officials and refugee organizations are preparing for what could be a difficult winter. While the full impact of a potential second Trump presidency is still unclear, many are bracing for a shift in migration patterns that could affect Canada's border policies for years to come.
Iran remains the most sanctioned country in the world, facing years of stringent measures aimed at curbing its oil exports and global influence. And despite these sanctions, Iran has managed to increase its oil exports significantly, with revenues reaching over $40 billion in 2023. But with Donald Trump's return to the White House, a more focused maximum pressure policy looms over Iran. This policy, which crippled Iran's economy during Trump's first term, is expected to target the country's growing oil revenues. This time, however, the situation seems more complicated for Trump to handle. Iran has been able to bypass U.S. sanctions in recent times, and much of it can be attributed to the rise of its dark fleet. Now, data shows that Iran uses over 300 dark fleet ships, vessels that disable tracking devices to evade detection to transport crude oil. Additionally, while crude exports to other countries have fallen by 3% this year, exports to China have surged by 30%. China has emerged as a major buyer for Iranian oil, accounting for over 85% of the total oil exports. By tightening sanctions and cutting off key revenue sources for Iran's oil sector, Trump aims to cripple Iran's economy again. However, this comes at a time when global oil prices are facing significant volatility, driven by supply disruptions, geopolitical tensions, and shifting demand patterns. With China absorbing most of Iran's oil exports, any interruption in these shipments could send ripples through the global supply chain, especially in China. As supply tightens and if OPEC nations are unable to fill the gap, the impact on oil prices could be swift. Prices could surge in the short term due to a constricted supply. Markets may also experience heightened uncertainty as traders weigh the long-term impact of sanctions. Additionally, the ongoing geopolitical tensions in West Asia only add fuel to fire, making oil markets increasingly reactive to any news of conflict or political instability.
US Senator Bernie Sanders has accused Kamala Harris of failing to offer voters a pro-worker agenda. Speaking to the NBC, he refused to blame Joe Biden for the Democrats' election loss. He says more could have been done to support working Americans.
It's not either or, Chris, and this is the problem. You can do both. You could say that I'm for raising the minimum wage to a living wage, guarantee health care for all people, expanding Social Security. And by the way, I also support a woman's right to control her own body, etc. It's not either or. It's going forward in both directions.
David Blevins has more.
Sweep both of the Rust Belt and of the Sun Belt. No one saw that coming. He's been uncharacteristically quiet, I have to say, since his victory speech earlier in the week. And perhaps that's a strategy to let the airwaves be filled with the meltdown that's going on within the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders, of course, is not a member of the Democratic Party. He's an independent senator for Vermont. But he did twice seek the Democratic Party nomination for the presidency. And this morning, he has again doubled down on this claim that the Democrats abandoned the working people, and that's why the working people abandoned them. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, he's holed up here with his advisors at Mar-a-Lago, putting together his administration. We know more about who's out than who's in, because last night he tweeted on his own social media platform that there would be no place for former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo or former Ambassador Nikki Haley. Hardly surprising, given that she was his nearest rival in the Republican primary. He will hit the road to Washington later this week for a meeting in the Oval Office with President Biden. The first part, I suppose, of the transfer of power. The White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says this morning that that meeting will focus on issues both at home and abroad, particularly the potential for a ceasefire in the Middle East and what happens next in Ukraine. So I suppose it's safe to say we're 1,000 miles from Washington here in West Palm Beach, but it's the conversations taking place over there at Mar-a-Lago that are going to shape America for the next 4 years.
Now, following the outcome of the 2024 U.S. presidential election, many Americans expressed their frustration online with a noticeable surge in searches related to moving abroad. Google Trends revealed a spike in queries like leaving the country and how to move, particularly after news broke that Donald Trump would return to the White House. Following Trump's victory, one of the most popular destinations was Canada, with searches for how to move to Canada peaking on the 6th of November. Interest was highest in Democratic strongholds. Additionally, searches for "Can I move to another country?" surged in key swing states. A recent survey by Casino.org, which polled over 4,000 Americans, found that 21% of the respondents said that they would consider moving abroad if their preferred candidate lost. However, most of these feelings appeared to be more about frustration than genuine intent to leave. Canada topped the list to preferred destinations, followed by the United Kingdom and Japan. Japan has been gradually opening its doors to foreign workers and demographic changes. It launched a digital nomad visa this year, attracting those interested in a temporary stay. Other popular countries include Australia, Italy, Ireland, New Zealand, and Switzerland, with Mexico and Costa Rica also ranking highly. For those interested in relocating, cultural reasons were the top motivation, followed by jobs and healthcare. Only a small percentage cited taxes and education as factors influencing their decision to move. The surge in interest coincides with broader dissatisfaction among Americans, as poll found nearly 2/3 of the public believed the country was on the wrong track.
In a fresh development over the South China Sea, China has formally rejected new maritime claims from the Philippines, stating that they severely infringe on its territorial sovereignty. This comes after Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. signed legislation to define the country's maritime entitlements and establish sea lanes aimed at reinforcing Philippine sovereignty. China, however, asserts that the South China Sea, including Scarborough Shoal or Huangyan Island, is part of its territory, a claim that has been the source of tensions between the two countries for years. In a statement, China's foreign ministry announced a baseline of territorial waters around Scarborough Shoal, promising to take all necessary measures to defend its claims. China's Coast Guard has also accused the Philippines of sending military vessels into the area and engaging in illegal fishing. The Philippines, backed by a 2016 international ruling, maintains that the area lies within its exclusive economic zone, with the U.S. supporting Manila. Global attention is on this strategic region as the disputes continue to escalate.
जब यहाँ पे लोग जमा थे और उसमें हर तरह के लोग थे, सरकारी और आम आवाम के जो बाकी भी जो मुसाफिर थे, यहाँ पे तकरीबन 150 से 200 की तादाद थी जो यहाँ पे जमा थे और यहाँ पे धमाका हुआ। इनिशियली हमने जो चीज़ का इन्वेस्टिगेट किया, क्राइम सीन, ये सारा कुछ हमें इनिशियली लग रहा था कि शायद कोई खुदकुश होगा, लेकिन क्योंकि आवाम का इतना जमघटा और रश था इस जगह पे, मौके पे, तो मज़ीद हम इसका तयन कर रहे हैं कि इन एक्चुअली इसकी नोयत थी क्या। इनिशियली अभी तक जो फिगर्स हमारे पास आहिस्ता आहिस्ता जो पाइल अप हुए हैं जो कंफर्म हुए हैं, जिसमें 16 जो हैं शहादतें कंफर्म हुई हैं, लेकिन ये बाकी क्रिटिकल हालत में हैं और ये फिगर जो है हमारी अप हो सकती है, और 30 की ज़ख्मी की जो हमारे पास फिगर।
बेसिकली एक सुसाइड अटैक था। ऑलरेडी इसकी जो जिम्मेदारी है वो कबूल कर लिया है टेररिस्ट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ने। इस टाइम पर हमारे सिविल हॉस्पिटल में 17 के करीब ज़ख्मी लोग हैं, 19 के करीब ज़ख्मी लोग हमारे CMH में हैं और 24 हमारी कंफर्म्ड अनफॉर्चुनेट शहादत हो चुकी हुई हैं। ये जो अटैक था ये प्राइमरीली लॉ इन्फोर्समेंट एजेंसीज़ पे भी था और साथ ही साथ सिविलियंस को भी टारगेट किया गया।
Well, as the war nears the 1,000-day mark, Russia and Ukraine have intensified their assaults on each other. Ukraine launched a drone strike on Moscow, its biggest attack on the Russian capital since the beginning of the war in 2022. The fierce onslaught forced the temporary shutdown of 2 of the city's major airports, injuring at least 1 person. Russian officials claim to have shot down 34 drones flying towards Moscow over the Ramenskoye and Kolomensky districts of the Moscow region, as well as in Domodovo city, home to one of the city's biggest airports. Though Moscow reported no major damage, Russia's Federal Air Transport Agency says the airports of Domodovo, Sheremetyevo and Zhukovo had to divert flights. Moscow and its surrounding region, with a population of at least 21 million people, is one of the biggest metropolitan areas in Europe alongside Istanbul. Kolomensky is an administrative and municipal district located nearly 20 kilometers from Moscow. The Ramenskoye district, some 45 kilometers southeast of the Kremlin, and was last targeted by Ukraine in September in what was then the biggest attack on the Russian capital. The Russian air defenses claimed to have destroyed 20 drones back then. Ukraine, on the other hand, claims at least 2 people were injured in a Russian drone attack on the Odessa region. At least 6 residential buildings and a gas station are among the damaged infrastructure in that region. Ukraine's Air Force claimed its air defenses downed 62 out of 145 Russian drones launched on 13 regions of the war-torn country, including Odessa. Russian authorities have not yet commented on the attack.
Четверту ніч поспіль ворог атакує наше місто. Велика кількість шахідів. Ви все знаєте і бачите, що сьогодні відбувається. К щастю, нема загиблих, але є постраждали люди. Багато зруйновано, пошкоджено осель, квартир, зруйновані будівлі, приватна будівля, люди залишились майже на вулиці.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called for its Western partners for more supply of weapons to help protect the country's skies. He claims Russia has fired 145 Shaheds and other drone strikes at Ukraine overnight, the most in any single nighttime attack of the war so far. Meanwhile, Putin said he saw positive signals from US President-elect Donald Trump's position on Ukraine. However, he warned that it will be hard to predict how Trump will behave in office.